The galaxy had a name for Earth. Not the name humans gave themselves. Not Earth, or Terra, or the Blue Marble. The Galactic Council, a coalition of 47 intelligent species spread across 11 star systems, called humanity's home world something far less flattering in their shared diplomatic tongue. Translated loosely into English, it meant the loud, wet rock. And honestly, most humans would have laughed at that. But in the year 2387, nobody was laughing anymore. Commander Sarah Weston stood at the observation deck of the UEF KERO, the United Earth Federation's most advanced warship, and also the most classified military asset in human history. The ship was so secret that even most of Earth's own government didn't know it existed. It had no official registration. It didn't appear on any star map. When it moved through space, it didn't leave a trace, not a heat signature, not a gravitational ripple, not a single photon of exhaust. Because the KERO didn't run on anything the Galactic Council had ever seen before. Sarah pressed her palm against the cold observation glass and stared out at the dark. Space was beautiful from here. Endless. The kind of beautiful that made you feel small and enormous at the same time. 43 years old, silver threading through her dark hair, crow's feet carved deep at the corners of her brown eyes, she had spent 20 of those years preparing for this moment. HFY, she thought, a phrase she had picked up from her grandmother who had migrated from Lahore to Houston 2 generations ago. HFY. From now on it's mine to carry. She had said it at her grandmother's funeral. She had said it the day she was promoted to commander. And she said it now, quietly, to the dark between the stars, because she knew that what came next would change everything. Commander. The voice behind her was calm, measured, and belonged to Lieutenant Marcus Cole, her second in command, a 29-year-old prodigy from Atlanta who had graduated top of his class at the United Earth Military Academy and then immediately been recruited into a program so classified it didn't have a name on paper. He was tall, lean, with warm dark skin and eyes that always looked like they were solving a problem even when the rest of his face was completely still. We've received the Council's transmission. Sarah didn't turn around. And? They've issued us a formal warning. Third one this month. He paused. They're calling our presence in the Veran corridor a violation of the Neutral Space Accords. We're not in the Veran corridor. No, ma'am. We're 17,000 kilometers outside it. He paused again. But they don't know that. Because they can't see us. Now Sarah turned. A small, quiet smile crossed her face, the kind of smile that didn't mean happiness. It meant something older than happiness. Something like certainty. Good, she said. Let's keep it that way. For now. The KERO had been born from catastrophe. 12 years earlier, in 2375, the Galactic Council had made what they considered a perfectly reasonable decision. Humanity had been a junior member of the Council for 20 years at that point, admitted on a provisional basis after first contact was established by a Veran survey drone that stumbled across an old Earth radio broadcast somewhere near Jupiter's orbit. The Council had debated humanity's membership for 11 of those 20 years. Most species considered humans to be what the Draith, a reptilian civilization from the Kethra system, diplomatically called developmentally accelerated but emotionally primitive. In other words, smart enough to be dangerous but not mature enough to be trusted. So in 2375, the Galactic Council passed Resolution 7 Gamma, the Human Limitation Accord. Under its terms, humanity was prohibited from developing faster-than-light drives beyond Class 3 capability. Prohibited from fielding warships with primary weapons arrays above a certain energy threshold. Prohibited from exploring or colonizing any star system within 40 light-years of another Council member's territory without written approval, a process that took, on average, 63 years. The Council framed it as a developmental safeguard. A way to give humanity time to mature. On Earth they called it something else. They called it a cage. The official response from the United Earth Federation government was measured and diplomatic. Protests were filed. Appeals were submitted. Earth's ambassador to the Council, a brilliant woman named Dr. Priya Nair, spent 3 years making eloquent, passionate, legally precise arguments for why Resolution 7 Gamma was discriminatory, unfair, and a violation of humanity's sovereign rights. The Council listened politely. And then they voted to extend the accord for another 50 years. That was the day that Dr. Eleanor Voss, Earth's most brilliant physicist and a woman who had never once in her life used a swear word in public, walked into the classified briefing room beneath New Geneva and said, very quietly, to a room full of military generals and government officials, I'll build something they've never imagined. And KERO, When it's ready, they will understand what they have done. Eleanor Voss was 61 years old when she said those words. She was 73 when the KERO first powered up its dark matter drive in a shielded testing facility buried 3 kilometers beneath the Atacama Desert in Chile. She didn't live to see it fly. She died of heart failure 14 months before the ship's first deep space trial, quietly in a hospital bed in Santiago, with her daughter holding her hand and a classified tablet on her chest containing the final equations for the ship's primary weapons system. The equations were the last thing she finished. She completed them 4 hours before she lost consciousness for the last time. Her daughter, Dr. Mia Voss, herself a physicist, herself brilliant, herself absolutely furious at the Galactic Council, carried the tablet out of the hospital room, walked to the nearest secure communications terminal, encrypted the files at the highest classification level Earth possessed, and transmitted them to the KERO project. Then she walked back to her mother's room and sat with her until the end. Sarah Weston had never met Eleanor Voss in person. But she had read everything the woman had ever written. Every paper, every classified report, every handwritten note that had been carefully preserved and digitized by the project team. She felt like she knew her. And standing on the observation deck of the ship that Eleanor had built with her mind and her fury and her absolute refusal to accept the cage the Council had put around her species, Sarah felt the weight of that inheritance like a physical thing pressing against her sternum. The KERO was not just a warship. It was an answer. Now the question was, when exactly to deliver it? Across the galaxy, in a chamber that humans had never been allowed to enter, a different kind of conversation was taking place. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council was located on Veran Prime, the home world of the oldest and most powerful species in the known galaxy, the Veranians. They were tall, pale, vaguely luminescent creatures who communicated partly through spoken language and partly through subtle bioluminescent patterns that rippled across their translucent skin. They had been spacefaring for 11,000 years. They had seen civilizations rise and collapse. They considered themselves, without any particular arrogance, to simply be the most experienced administrators of galactic civilization that had ever existed. They were also, as it happened, profoundly wrong about humanity. High Counselor Thesan Vor stood at the center of the assembly hall, a vast circular chamber carved from living crystal that hummed with the soft resonance of 47 species worth of atmospheric processors, and addressed the assembled council with the particular calm that 11,000 years of unquestioned authority tends to produce. The human fleet has been quiet, he said. Their last Class 3 drive test was logged 14 months ago. Their weapons development appears to have stalled. He paused, letting his skin ripple with a pattern that translated approximately as reassurance. I believe the Accord is working as intended. They are learning patience. At the far end of the chamber, a Draith counselor named Vekrith shifted in his climate-controlled seat. He was old, by Draith standards ancient, and he had developed, over a long career of watching other species, a particular instinct for when something felt wrong. Something felt wrong. High Counselor, Vekrith said carefully, I want to raise a concern. Our monitoring stations near Earth's solar system have reported intermittent gaps in their sensor logs. Brief. No more than a few seconds each time. But consistent. Equipment malfunction, another counselor said dismissively. A Lycian, plant-based, from a civilization that communicated primarily through chemical signals and had, as a result, developed a slight cultural arrogance about anything that communicated via sound waves, which they considered primitive. Possibly, Vekrith said. But the gaps always occur in the same region of space. And they always coincide with, he checked his data panel, gravitational microfluctuations that our systems cannot attribute to any known source. The chamber was quiet for a moment. High Counselor Thesan Vor let his skin ripple with patience. The humans do not have the technology to cause gravitational fluctuations, Counselor Vekrith. That would require a dark matter drive capable of. He stopped. The chamber went very still. Vekrith looked at him steadily. Yes, he said quietly. That is exactly what it would require. The dark matter drive was not supposed to be possible. That was the thing the Galactic Council kept coming back to, in the days after Vekrith raised his concern. Not unlikely. Not difficult. Not theoretically challenging. According to the best scientific understanding of 11 Council species, civilizations that had collectively accumulated over 40,000 years of spacefaring technological development, a dark matter drive was simply, fundamentally, not possible for a civilization at humanity's developmental stage. The energy requirements alone should have been prohibitive. Dark matter, the invisible, non-interacting substance that made up roughly 27% of the universe's total mass energy, didn't behave like normal matter. It didn't emit light. It didn't absorb light. It passed through ordinary matter like a ghost through a wall. You couldn't grab it, contain it, or focus it with any conventional technology. The best the Council's most advanced members had managed was passive detection, sensors capable of mapping dark matter density in a given region of space. That was it. That was the ceiling. Even the Veranians, with 11,000 years of technological development, had never managed to use dark matter as an energy source. They had theories. They had mathematical frameworks. But the gap between theory and working technology was, by their best estimates, at least 2,000 years wide. Humanity had crossed that gap in 12 years. Dr. Mia Voss, sitting in her mother's old office at the Atacama facility, a cluttered room with white boards covering every wall and a photograph of Eleanor Voss as a young woman taped above the desk, could have explained how, if anyone had been cleared to ask her. The answer was both simple and mind-bending, and it came down to a single insight that her mother had arrived at through a combination of mathematical intuition, 6 months of 18-hour workdays, and what Eleanor herself had described in her notes as the particular stubbornness of someone who has been told no too many times. The Council's scientists had always tried to approach dark matter from the outside. They treated it as something foreign, something that existed separately from normal matter and needed to be bridged. Eleanor Voss had realized at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in 2376 that this was the wrong frame entirely. Dark matter didn't need to be bridged. It needed to be harmonized. It was already everywhere. It already permeated every atom of every ship, every body, every planet. It wasn't separate from normal matter, it was woven through it at a level so fundamental that conventional physics had missed it the way you might miss the water you're swimming in. Eleanor had developed a resonance field, a precisely calibrated electromagnetic array that could, essentially, make a ship vibrate at a frequency that dark matter responded to. Not containing it, not focusing it, just asking it to move in a particular direction. And dark matter, it turned out, was very obliging when you asked correctly. The drive didn't generate thrust in any conventional sense. It didn't push the ship through space. It made the ship and a bubble of local space-time slide relative to the rest of the universe, using dark matter as the medium. The result was a form of faster-than-light travel that left no electromagnetic signature, no heat trail, no gravitational wake, because the ship wasn't technically moving through space. Space was moving around it. The Council's sensors had never been designed to detect it. They were looking for the wrong things entirely. Mia had spent 3 years refining her mother's equations and applying them to the KERO's drive system. She was 38 now. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn jaw and a habit of speaking very quickly when she was excited, which was often. She had also, in the past year, developed a habit of sleeping in the office, partly because the work consumed her, and partly because the office smelled like her mother's coffee and her mother's books, and sometimes that was the only thing that made the distance feel smaller. She was in the office when Commander Sarah Weston appeared on her secure comm screen at 0300 hours. "We've received a Council monitoring ping," Sarah said without preamble. "Fourth one this week. They're looking harder." Mia was already awake. She was always already awake at 0300. She pushed her hair back from her face and looked at the screen. Did they detect anything? No. But they're narrowing their search pattern. Vekrith is the one pushing it. Do you know his file? Old Draith counselor. Former military intelligence. He's the sharpest mind on their council, honestly. Mia paused. Which means if anyone is going to figure out what we've built, it's him. How long do we have? Mia considered. If I had to guess? 6 months before their sensor arrays are repositioned to cover the specific gravitational signatures we're producing. Maybe 8 if we're careful about where we conduct trials. She looked at the whiteboard nearest to her, covered in equations that even most Earth scientists couldn't read. We need to be ready before that window closes, Sarah. I know. The weapons arrays are coming along. 2 of the 6 are fully calibrated. The other 4 need another. No. Mia's voice was quiet but firm. They need to be perfect. Not operational. Perfect. Because we're not going to get a second chance at this. When we show them what we've built, the moment they know it exists, the entire dynamic changes. Permanently. She looked at the photograph of her mother. My mother built this ship to make a point. The point only works if we're ready to back it up. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, 8 months then. We'll be ready in 8 months. I'll hold you to that. Lieutenant Marcus Cole didn't sleep well in space. He never had. It wasn't fear, it was something more fundamental, some persistent low-level awareness of the fact that he was enclosed in a metal shell in a vacuum where a fracture the width of a human hair in any external surface could kill him in seconds. He had learned to live with it the way you learn to live with any persistent background discomfort, by developing other routines, other anchors, other ways of reminding himself that the present moment was survivable. His anchor was coffee. Specifically, the terrible coffee produced by the KERO's fabricator units, a watery, over-extracted approximation of a medium roast that somehow tasted, every single time, like ambition and disappointment in equal measure. He drank it every morning at 0500 in the ship's forward observation lounge, which was small and almost always empty at that hour, with the lights dimmed and the observation panels at full transparency. He was on his third cup when Chief Engineer Rosa Diaz found him. Rosa was 46, compact, dark-haired, with engineer's hands, scarred and calloused and permanently bearing traces of lubricant in the creases that didn't fully wash out no matter how hard she scrubbed. She was from El Paso originally, had spent 15 years building conventional spacecraft before being recruited into the KERO project, and she had an absolutely legendary ability to fix things that weren't supposed to be fixable. She also had no patience for small talk at 0500. "We have a problem," she said, dropping into the seat across from him and wrapping both hands around her own coffee mug. "Good morning to you too, Rosa. Dark matter containment field in drive array 3 is showing micro-oscillations. Nothing critical yet. But the pattern is consistent with harmonic fatigue in the resonance emitters." Marcus set down his cup. "Meaning?" "Meaning if we push array 3 past 70% capacity, the containment field could destabilize." She paused. "Which would be bad." "How bad?" "Somewhere between very and extinction level, depending on variables I'm still calculating." She said this in exactly the same tone she might have used to report that the fabricator was low on coffee. Marcus appreciated that about her. "I need 3 weeks to replace the emitters. Minimum." "We don't have 3 weeks." "I'm aware of that, Marcus. I'm telling you what I need, not what we have." She drank her coffee. "We can operate at 60% on array 3 in the meantime, which reduces our total dark matter drive output by 11%. She raised an eyebrow. "You know the specs." "I know the specs." He looked out at the stars. 60% is enough for now. We're not in combat. Not yet." He looked back at her. She met his eyes steadily over the rim of her mug. "Fix it as fast as you can," he said. "I'll tell the commander." 2,400 light-years away on Veran Prime, High Counselor Thesan Vor was doing something he had not done in over a century. He was worried. The worry had arrived quietly, the way important worries always do, not with a bang but with the slow accumulation of small things that didn't quite fit. Vekratha's report about the gravitational anomalies. The unusual quiet from Earth's military development programs. The way humanity's ambassador to the Council, a calm and unreadable man named James Okafor, had seemed almost relaxed in recent sessions. Not resigned, the way junior council members usually seemed when they'd accepted their limitations, but patient. Like someone who knows something is coming and is simply waiting for it to arrive. Thesan Vor had been in galactic politics for 400 years. He had learned to read species the way others read weather patterns, by attending to the small signs that preceded major changes. And everything he was reading about humanity right now was pointing in a direction that made him deeply uneasy. He summoned his intelligence chief, a lean, silver-eyed Varanian named Sorith, late in the evening cycle. "Tell me what we don't know about humanity," he said. Sorith, to her credit, didn't try to answer with what they did know. She had been in intelligence long enough to understand the question. She sat across from the High Counselor and was quiet for a moment before she said, "We don't know what they've been building underground." Thesan Vor was very still. "Explain." "Our satellite monitoring of Earth's surface is comprehensive, but monitoring surface, not subsurface. 3 years ago, we detected significant thermal signatures consistent with large-scale industrial operations in multiple underground locations: Atacama Desert, North American Midwest, Central Siberia. The signatures were brief. Then they stopped. They stopped because the operations concluded? Or because they found a way to shield the thermal output?" Sorith's silver eyes were steady and slightly cold, the way Varanian eyes always looked when they were thinking hardest. "We don't know which." "And you didn't flag this at the time?" "We flagged it. It was assessed as consistent with Earth's known geological survey programs and rated low priority." Pause. "That assessment may have been incorrect." Thesan Vor looked out through the crystal walls of his office at the lights of Veran Prime's capital city, spreading across the valley below like scattered stars. "Get me everything," he said quietly. "Every sensor reading, every anomaly, every logged exception from every monitoring station in humanity's sector for the past 12 years. I want it all reviewed. Fresh eyes. No assumptions." Sora stood. "And if we find something concerning?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Then we'll need to decide whether to act on it. And act quickly." He paused. "And I will need to ask myself a question I have not had to ask in a very long time." "What question, High Counselor?" He turned from the window. His skin rippled, a pattern that, in Veranian bioluminescent language, meant something that translated imperfectly but approximately as fear of being outpaced. "Whether we made a mistake." The Council's message arrived at Earth's diplomatic station above Luna at 0847 hours, Earth Standard Time, on a Thursday in March of 2387. Ambassador James Okafor received it in his office, a modest room that reflected his personality, which was to say, precise, undecorated, and deceptively simple. He was 55, Nigerian-American, with close-cropped gray hair and the particular stillness of someone who had spent 30 years in rooms where other people wanted to panic and had learned that the most powerful thing you could do in those rooms was simply not. He had been Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council for 8 years. He was, by any fair assessment, the best diplomat humanity had ever produced. He read the message twice. Then he set it down on his desk and looked out the window at the gray curve of the moon below. The message was polite. Formally, bureaucratically, diplomatically polite, the kind of polite that the Council had perfected over millennia, where every word was chosen to maintain the veneer of civilized discourse while delivering a message that was, underneath the varnish, essentially a threat. The Council had formally requested that Earth submit to a comprehensive inspection of all military development programs under the terms of Resolution 7 Gamma. The inspection would be conducted by a joint Council team of 12 inspectors representing 5 species. It would cover all known Earth military facilities above and below surface. Earth had 60 days to respond with a schedule. Failure to comply would result in Earth's Provisional Council membership being suspended, all trade agreements being reviewed, and, here was the part that didn't appear in the polite language but was clearly implied, the possibility of coordinated member action to ensure compliance with the accord. In other words, do what we say or we show up with a fleet. Okafor picked up his secure communicator and placed a call that went through 4 encryption layers and 2 quantum relay stations before it reached its destination. "They sent the inspection demand," he said when Sarah Weston's face appeared on the screen. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, "How long?" 60 days to respond. The inspection itself would begin approximately 30 days after that. "So 90 days. Yes." Another silence. Sarah was doing math in her head, he could see it in her eyes, that particular distant focus. "We need 8 months, she said finally. "I know." Okafor looked at the moon. "I'll stall. I'm good at stalling." "James?" Her voice was careful. "If they figure out what we have before we're ready?" "They won't." He said it with a quietness that wasn't bravado. It was the quietness of someone who has prepared for every contingency and accepted every risk. "I'll file a formal objection on procedural grounds. The Accord's inspection protocols require unanimous consent of the target species government, and Earth's parliament has never formally ratified that clause. It'll take them weeks just to process the challenge. Then I'll request a review committee. Then I'll submit counter-proposals." He paused. "Every bureaucratic weapon at my disposal, Sarah. I promise you." "How long can you buy us?" He thought about it carefully. 4 months. Maybe 5. "That's not 8. "No," he agreed quietly. "It's not." They looked at each other across the encrypted connection. 2 people who had dedicated decades of their lives to a single purpose, now facing the arithmetic of their situation with clear eyes. "Then we build faster," Sarah said. The next 4 months aboard the KERO were the most intense of Marcus Cole's life, and that was saying something because his life had included a tour of duty on the Martian frontier, 2 classified combat missions that officially hadn't happened, and the time he'd had to personally reroute power from life support to the navigation array during a dark matter drive trial that had gone sideways in ways that Rosa Diaz still refused to discuss in detail. But those 4 months had a different quality. A pressure that wasn't external, it came from inside the ship, from the people inside it. 22 crew members, each of them the best in their field, each of them clearance level 7 or above, each of them fully aware of what was at stake. There was no fear in it. Or rather, fear was there, but it was the kind that sharpens you rather than slows you. Rosa and her engineering team worked in rotating 20-hour shifts. The resonance emitters in Drive Array 3 were replaced, a process that involved manually accessing sections of the ship's inner hull that required 2 people working in pressurized suits in a crawlspace roughly the size of a large refrigerator, 4 hours at a time. Rosa did most of it herself. When Marcus asked why she didn't delegate it, she looked at him like he'd suggested she let someone else perform surgery on her own heart. Because if something goes wrong, I need to be the one who caused it, she said. And the one who fixes it. The weapons arrays were the other urgent project. The KERO carried 6 primary dark matter projection cannons, weapons that had no analog in any council member's arsenal. They didn't fire conventional energy beams or mass accelerators. They fired precisely focused dark matter resonance pulses, waves of harmonic energy tuned to interact with normal matter in a very specific and very devastating way. The physics were, Mia Voss had once explained to Marcus in a 45-minute briefing that he had understood about 60% of, conceptually straightforward. If dark matter could be made to resonate with normal matter at the right frequency, the energy transfer was catastrophic. Not in the sense of a conventional explosion, which released energy outward in all directions. In the sense of a targeted disruption, a resonance cascade that could selectively destabilize the molecular bonds in a specific object while leaving everything around it untouched. In practical terms, it meant the KERO could fire a weapon that would pass through conventional ship shielding, because shields were designed to stop energy in mass and dark matter resonance was neither, and disassemble a target at the molecular level from the inside out, without any visible beam or projectile. You couldn't see it coming. You couldn't shield against it. You couldn't detect it until it was already hitting you. The Council's warships, even the most advanced Varanian dreadnoughts, would have no defense. That wasn't bravado. It was physics. The moment that changed everything came not with a weapons firing, but with a miscalculation. It happened on a Tuesday. The KERO was conducting a standard dark matter drive calibration in a region of space roughly 40 light-years from Earth, safely outside any Council monitoring zone, or so they thought. Rosa had cleared Drive Array 3 for full-capacity operation for the first time since the emitter replacement. The test was supposed to be brief, a 2-second full-power burst, just enough to confirm the array was stable. Something was wrong with their calculation of the local dark matter density. The drive fired perfectly, but the resonance pulse interacted with an unexpectedly dense knot of dark matter in the immediate area, producing a gravitational wave that was, by normal cosmic standards, extremely small. By the standards of extremely sensitive galactic sensors, it was enormous. Marcus was on the bridge when Rosa's voice came through the comm, Array 3 nominal. Drive test complete. Gravitational signature was, a pause. Larger than expected. Sarah turned from the main viewport. How much larger? Another pause. The kind that precedes bad news. Scale of 7. We were expecting it too. Marcus felt something drop in his stomach. That's detectable. From a standard monitoring array, probably not, Rosa said carefully. But from a repositioned high-sensitivity survey array aimed at this sector. Sarah was already moving to the communications terminal. Okafor. Now. Okafor received the alert 6 hours later, in the middle of his third stalling session with the Council's inspection committee. He was in the middle of a particularly elegant argument about procedural technicalities in the ratification records when his priority communicator vibrated against his wrist with the code that meant emergency. He excused himself, stepped into an antechamber and read the message. Then he stepped back into the committee room, composed his expression into its usual stillness and said, "Gentlemen, I've just been informed of a logistical matter requiring my attention. I wonder if we might reschedule the remainder of today's session for Ambassador Okafor." The voice belonged to the Council's chief inspector, a Varanian named Paleth, silver-eyed and impassive. "Before you go, I wonder if you can explain something to us." Okafor waited. "Approximately 6 hours ago, our survey array in Sector 9 recorded a gravitational signature approximately 40 light-years from your solar system." Paleth's skin rippled with a pattern that Okafor, after 8 years, had learned to read. It meant controlled alarm. The signature is consistent with a Class 9 dark matter resonance event. Pause. Does Earth have any knowledge of what might have caused it? The room was very quiet. Okafor looked at Paleth for a long moment. 30 years of diplomatic training. 30 years of reading rooms and managing moments. He looked at the inspector, and the inspector looked back, and in the silence between them was an entire world shifting on its axis. "I'll look into it," Okafor said calmly, "and get back to you." He walked out of the room at a perfectly measured pace, not hurried, not slow. Just a man going to attend to a logistical matter. He was in a private communications pod with the quantum encryption running before the door of the antechamber had fully closed behind him. "They detected the pulse," he said the moment Sarah's face appeared. "We're out of time." Sarah Weston looked at him steadily. He could see behind her the bridge of the KERO. He could see Marcus Cole at his station, expression controlled. He could see Rosa Diaz on a secondary screen watching. "How long?" Sarah asked. "Days," Okafor said. "Maybe less. They'll be running analysis on that signature right now. When they understand what it means." He stopped. "Sarah, we need to decide." "Decide what?" "Whether we show them now on our terms." He paused. "Or whether we wait and let them find us on theirs." The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Sarah looked at Marcus. Marcus gave a small, steady nod. Sarah looked back at Okafor. "UBSYMJHY," she said quietly. "It's ours to deliver." Okafor closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he opened them and straightened in his seat. "I'll prepare the transmission." The transmission was sent simultaneously to every member species of the Galactic Council, through official diplomatic channels, encrypted to the highest Earth standard, which, the Council would later discover, was considerably higher than any standard they had previously encountered from humanity. It was sent in the Council's official diplomatic language, translated perfectly, which surprised many Council members because Earth's translation technology had always been considered somewhat unreliable. It was also, they would note later, significantly more direct than any previous Earth diplomatic communication. Read. To the Galactic Council and its assembled member species, the United Earth Federation wishes to inform you that we have developed certain technologies that were not anticipated under the terms of Resolution 7 Gamma. We believe it is in the interest of all parties to address this matter openly and in good faith. We request a full session of the Council Assembly at your earliest convenience. Earth's Ambassador Okafor will attend in person. Additional representation will also be present. We look forward to a productive discussion. The phrase, additional representation, was doing a great deal of work in that final paragraph, and the Council's communications analysts flagged it immediately. Additional representation from Earth could mean many things. A scientific delegation, a military observer, additional diplomatic staff. The analysts ran through the possibilities and determined, based on Earth's history and capabilities, that it almost certainly meant one of the first two. They were wrong. The Council's Grand Assembly Hall on Veran Prime had seen many historic moments in its 3,000-year history. The signing of the original compact. The admission of the 7th, 8th, and 9th member species. The trial of Kethera, which had taken 11 years and reorganized the entire structure of galactic law. But nobody who was present on the day that the UEF KERO materialized above Veran Prime, arriving without warning from faster-than-light transit, visible suddenly and completely on every sensor array the planet possessed, all 400 meters of her, would ever argue that it wasn't the most singular moment in the Assembly Hall's history. Because no ship in history had ever simply appeared. Not like that. Not without a sensor trace, not without a gravity wake, not without the characteristic distortion that FTL travel produced. Every known FTL system announced itself. There was always a signature, always a ripple, always something. The KERO was just not there, and then she was. And she was enormous. 400 meters was not, in galactic terms, the largest warship ever built. The Varanian Grand Fleet's dreadnoughts were 600 meters long. The Draitha's battle carriers ran to 8. But there was something about the KERO's silhouette that communicated, to every species in the Council fleet that scrambled to intercept her, something that pure size didn't capture. She was dark. Not just in color, though her hull absorbed light in a way that made her hard to look at directly, as though your eye kept sliding off her edges. Dark in the deeper sense that military officers from a dozen species felt before they could articulate why. She didn't have weapon ports in places where weapon ports were supposed to be. She didn't have the standard structural reinforcements that indicated conventional shield systems. The Varanian fleet admiral who arrived first in his own command vessel tried to get a sensor scan of her interior layout and got back nothing useful, just a wall of quiet interference that his equipment registered simply as not applicable. Unidentified vessel. The admiral broadcast on all frequencies in the Council's diplomatic language, using the formal challenge protocol that had been the same for 9,000 years. Identify yourself and state your intentions. There was a pause of approximately 5 seconds. Then a human voice, female, calm, accented in a way that Council translators identified as North American English, replied. This is Commander Sarah Weston of the United Earth Federation Warship KERO. Our intentions are peaceful. We're here to attend a council assembly session at the invitation of Ambassador Okafor. A brief pause. We'd appreciate an escort to a stable orbit if that's convenient. The Admiral stared at his communication screen. Then at his sensor screen. Then at the image of the KERO on his visual display, 400 meters of dark, sensor-resistant metal that had appeared from nowhere and was now sitting in Veran Prime's orbital space as though it belonged there. He made a decision that he would later describe to colleagues as the result of training, protocol, and the very reasonable assessment that if the ship had wanted to be hostile, he probably wouldn't have had time to notice. Escort acknowledged, he said. Please follow the designated approach vector. Thank you, Sarah said. We'll follow your lead. High Counselor Thessanvor watched the KERO approach on the assembly hall's main display, and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Genuine, unambiguous awe. Not because of the ship's size. Not even because of the fact of its impossible arrival. Because of what the ship represented, what it said about the species that had built it, in secret, in 12 years, while under active observation and formal restriction. What it said about the gap between what the Council had understood about humanity and what humanity actually was. Vekrith was standing beside him. The old Draith counselor had been right, of course, had flagged the anomalies, had raised the concern, had asked the right question months before anyone else. He was looking at the display with an expression that Thessanvor, who had known him for 2 centuries, could only describe as vindicated. They built it in 12 years, Thessanvor said quietly. They built this specific ship in 12 years, Vekrith corrected. We don't know what else they've built. The words hung in the air of the assembly hall like a frequency that every species could feel in their own particular way, a vibration of implication. Thessanvor turned to his aide. Prepare the full assembly. Every member. In person or via secure link. He was quiet for a moment. And contact Ambassador Okafor. Tell him we're ready. The walk from the shuttle bay to the assembly hall on Veran Prime was 300 meters of pristine crystalline corridor, softly lit, precisely temperature-controlled for each species' comfort. James Okafor had walked it 8 times in 8 years. He knew every meter of it. He walked it differently today. Today he walked it knowing that above the planet, in a stable orbit, sat 400 meters of the most advanced military technology in the known galaxy. Today he walked it as the representative of a species that had just quietly and completely changed the balance of power in the known universe. And today, for the first time in 8 years, he walked it without the particular weight that had settled on him the day Resolution 7 Gamma passed. The weight of someone who must speak with dignity on behalf of people who have been told they don't yet merit full dignity. The weight was still there. It had just changed its nature. It was no longer the weight of suppressed anger. It was the weight of enormous responsibility. He entered the assembly hall. 47 species looked at him. Some through eyes, some through sensory organs that served the same function in diverse anatomies. The room was the fullest it had ever been for a session in Okafor's tenure. Even the Lishanians, plant-based, usually sedentary, rarely attending in person, had sent physical representatives. Okafor walked to Earth's designated position. He sat down. He placed his hands flat on the table in front of him, one of his habitual gestures of groundedness, and looked at High Counselor Thessanvor. Thank you for convening so quickly, he said. His voice was exactly as it always was, measured, warm, precise. As though nothing unusual was happening. As though there wasn't, at that very moment, a human warship of impossible specification sitting in orbit above this chamber. I believe we have a few things to discuss. Thessanvor looked at him for a long moment. His skin rippled, a pattern that Okafor had never seen before in all his years of reading Varanian bioluminescent language. He had to think carefully to interpret it. It meant something like, I was wrong and I am beginning to understand how wrong. Yes, Ambassador, Thessanvor said quietly. I believe we do. The first question came from the Draith block. Vekrith himself stood, a courtesy in Draith culture, standing to indicate that a question was asked in genuine inquiry rather than challenge, and addressed Okafor directly. Ambassador. The vessel in our orbit, the KERO. How many of this class exist? The assembly hall went very quiet. It was, everyone understood, the question that mattered most. One ship was a demonstration. A fleet was a paradigm shift. Okafor looked at Vekrith steadily. That information is classified under United Earth Federation national security protocols, he said calmly. What I can tell you is that the KERO is fully operational and here today to represent Earth's position in this discussion. It was, diplomatically, a perfect non-answer. It confirmed nothing while denying nothing. And in the silence that followed, Every council member was doing exactly the calculation Okafor had intended them to do. We don't know how many there are. Vekrith nodded slowly and sat down. The second question came from the Lycian block, asked through their chemical communication interpreter, which translated the signals into audio. How was this vessel developed? The technology you are displaying is inconsistent with your species' assessed developmental level. Okafor allowed himself, for the first time in this session, a very slight smile. I appreciate the question, he said. The honest answer is that our assessed developmental level was based on information we were providing you, filtered through assumptions your scientists made about what humanity was capable of. Those assumptions were understandable but incorrect. He paused. Humanity is, and I say this without aggression, purely as a statement of fact, considerably more capable than you assumed. He let that sit. Then, we would like to discuss Resolution 7 Gamma. Above the planet, on the bridge of the KERO, Sarah Weston was monitoring the assembly session through Okafor's encrypted feed and managing, simultaneously, a tense standoff with the Veranian fleet. There were 23 Veranian warships in orbit around Veran Prime when the KERO arrived. Standard planetary defense configuration. They had positioned themselves in a loose perimeter around Earth's ship, not quite an encirclement, not quite a threat. More of a presence. A reminder. Sarah had acknowledged their presence with a brief, polite communication and then done nothing. Because doing nothing was the correct tactical choice. The KERO's passive sensor array was mapping every ship in that perimeter in real time. Their shield configurations, their weapon charge states, their engine signatures. If any of them made an aggressive move, the KERO would know about it well before any weapon was brought to bear. And if they had known what the KERO's weapons could do to their ships, well, that was part of what today was about. Marcus Cole was at his station monitoring the perimeter fleet. He looked calm. He was genuinely calm, or rather he had entered the particular state that experienced military officers develop when danger is real and present but the action required is stillness rather than movement. Every part of his training said, observe, assess, wait. So he was observing, assessing and waiting. Rosa Diaz was in engineering, running the dark matter drive at standby, which meant it was fully charged and capable of taking them to FTL in approximately 6 seconds if needed. She had also, quietly and without being asked, run a full diagnostic on the weapons arrays. They were ready. She hadn't said that to anyone, but they were ready. The crew member Sarah was watching most carefully was Ensign David Kim, 24 years old, youngest person on the ship, sensor specialist, and the first person aboard the KERO who had come close to losing his composure when the Veranian fleet surrounded them. He had been very still for 40 minutes. Too still. The kind of still that isn't calm but is trying to look like calm. Sarah walked over to his station. She didn't say anything for a moment, just stood beside him and looked at his screens which showed the perimeter fleet in precise tactical detail. You know what I notice? She said quietly. David looked up at her. Ma'am? Every one of those ships has their weapons in passive mode. They haven't powered up a single active weapon system. He looked at his screen. She watched him actually see it. The tiniest shift in his shoulders, tension releasing. They're scared, he said. Not triumphantly. More like someone landing on an explanation for the first time. They're uncertain, Sarah corrected gently. Which is actually more manageable than scared. Scared does unpredictable things. Uncertain does math. She paused. And when they do the math they'll see the same thing we see, that this situation is best resolved by talking. Which is exactly what Okafor is doing right now. David nodded. A real nod. Then he turned back to his screens. Sarah walked back to the command chair. She sat down. She looked at the planet below, blue-white in the local sun, not so different from Earth from this distance, and thought about Eleanor Voss who had never gotten to see this moment. SYMJHY she thought. I've got it from here. The assembly session lasted 9 hours. Okafor was extraordinary. Sarah, monitoring through the encrypted feed, watched him navigate questions, objections, outrage, fear, and political posturing with a precision that was almost musical, finding the exact tone, the exact word, the exact pause that each situation required. He was not triumphant. He was not aggressive. He was not, in any way, rubbing the Council's face in the magnitude of what Earth had accomplished. He was clear. He was patient. He was immovable. The core of his argument was simple. Resolution 7 Gamma had been imposed on humanity without humanity's consent, based on assumptions about human capability that were demonstrably incorrect, and it constituted a violation of the principle of sovereign equality that the Council's own founding charter claimed to uphold. The KERO was not a threat. She was evidence. Evidence that humanity had not needed the Council's permission to develop, and had never needed it. Earth was not asking the Council to revoke Resolution 7 Gamma. Earth was informing the Council that, from Earth's perspective, it was already void. High Counselor Thesanvor listened to all of this with the careful attention of someone who was, in real time, revising a worldview that had been stable for 400 years. He asked few questions. The ones he asked were precise and went to the heart of things. What did Earth want? What was Earth prepared to offer? What were Earth's intentions regarding the other Council member species? Okafor answered each one with the same quiet clarity. Earth wanted full, unconditional membership in the Council, with all the rights and responsibilities that other members held. Earth was prepared to offer exactly what the Council offered all members: good faith participation, honest diplomacy, and the shared work of maintaining galactic civilization. And Earth's intentions toward other species were exactly what they had always been: peaceful, cooperative, and sovereign. "We are not here to dominate anyone," Okafor said, near the end of the 9th hour. "We are here to be recognized as what we are, which is a species that is ready." He let the word sit in the room. Ready. Not powerful. Not dangerous. Ready. It was a word that spoke of preparation and responsibility rather than capacity for harm. Thesanvor looked at him for a long time. His skin was still, the Veranian equivalent of someone who has processed something difficult and arrived on the other side of it. "The Council will need time to deliberate," he said finally. "Of course," Okafor said. "We're not going anywhere." The deliberations took 3 days. During those 3 days the KERO remained in orbit above Veran Prime. The Veranian fleet remained in its perimeter position. Nobody fired anything. Nobody made any aggressive moves. The situation was, by any external measure, stable, a delicate equilibrium of mutual uncertainty and mutual calculation that held because everyone involved was smart enough to understand what breaking it would cost. On the second day of deliberations, Vekrith requested a private communication channel to Ambassador Okafor. Okafor received the request in his quarters at the Veranian diplomatic residence, a suite that had been calibrated for human atmosphere requirements with the particular precision of hosts who are trying very hard to be accommodating after a long period of not having tried at all. He accepted the channel. Vekrith appeared on his screen. The old Draith counselor looked tired, which was, for a Draith, a visible thing. A slight dulling of the iridescent scales around the eyes, a marginally slower quality to the blinking. He was silent for a moment before he spoke. "Ambassador," he said, "I want to speak to you plainly." "I'd welcome that," Okafor said. "I flagged the anomalies 9 months ago. I told the Council something was wrong with our picture of human development." He paused. "I was overruled." Reassured. "Told I was seeing patterns that weren't there." Another pause. "I wasn't." Okafor waited. "I am telling you this not to request credit. I am telling you because I want you to understand something." Vekrith's eyes, amber, slit-pupilled, ancient, were direct and steady. "There are members of this Council who are going to deliberate for 3 days and arrive at the conclusion that the correct response to what you have shown us is not accommodation but preemption." Okafor was very still. "Meaning?" "Meaning there are Council members who will argue that a humanity with this technology, outside the Accord, is too dangerous to allow to exist as it currently is. And that the time to act is before you return to your home system." Vekrith held his gaze. "I'm not one of those members. But they exist and they will make their arguments and you should know it." Okafor looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" Vekrith was quiet for a few seconds. "Because I have been in galactic politics for 200 years. And in that time I have seen the Council make this mistake before, with the Kethran Confederation before the trial. With the early Lycian expansion. The mistake of responding to something we don't understand with force, because force is simpler than understanding." His scale shifted. "We made that mistake with the Kethrans and it cost us 400 years of conflict. I would prefer not to make it again." He paused. "Especially not with a species that has just demonstrated they can build a dark matter warship in secret, in 12 years, under active surveillance." Okafor allowed himself one moment of feeling the weight of what Vekrith was telling him. Then he set it aside and was simply still and present. "What do you need from us?" he asked. "Nothing dramatic. I need you to be in the chamber when the vote happens. I need your presence to remind the deliberators that accommodation is an option." Pause. "And I need to know, off the record between two people who are trying to prevent something catastrophic, how many ships like the KERO actually exist?" Okafor looked at him for a long time. "Enough," he said finally. "To make the math very clear." Vekrith held his gaze. Then he nodded once slowly. Good, he said quietly. That is good. On the KERO, Sarah received Okafor's summary of the Vecrith conversation with the particular focused stillness of someone absorbing information that changes the shape of a situation. She called Marcus to her ready room, a small space off the main bridge, functional rather than comfortable, with a single porthole that currently showed the blue-white curve of Veran Prime and, at the edge of the frame, the prow of a Veranian patrol cruiser. There's a faction on the council considering preemption, she said after she'd summarized. Marcus absorbed this. Define preemption. In this context, destroying the KERO while we're sitting here before we can return to Earth. Removing our ability to demonstrate our technology to anyone else. Marcus looked at the porthole. At the Veranian cruiser. 23 ships in the perimeter. Yes. We could handle 23 ships. Almost certainly. She paused. But that's not the point. The point is we don't want to handle 23 ships. The point is we came here to talk and we'd like to leave here having talked, and the only way to ensure that is to make the math clear, Marcus said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. How? Sarah looked at the porthole for a long time. At the Veranian cruiser. At the planet below. At the stars beyond. We show them one thing, she said. Just one. Something that makes the math undeniable. Something that doesn't hurt anyone but makes it absolutely clear that the answer to should we attack the KERO is no. Marcus thought about it. The passive penetration demonstration. Sarah nodded slowly. The passive penetration demonstration was something Rosa had developed. A capability of the KERO's sensor and drive system that they had not included in any briefing materials, had not mentioned in any diplomatic communication. The ability to, while remaining in a fixed position in space, extend the dark matter resonance field to a radius of approximately 2,000 kilometers and gather a complete interior scan of every object within that radius. Shields, hull, internal systems, all of it. Like X-ray vision but more precise. In a combat context, it could be used to target weapons with pinpoint accuracy at any ship within range. But you could also use it non-lethally. You could use it to reach, gently, into a specific ship system, the navigational array, say, or the communications relay, and produce a tiny, targeted disruption that would temporarily disable that system without causing any harm to the ship or its crew. It was, in its peaceful form, essentially a knock on the door. A way of saying, I can reach you. I chose not to harm you. Please take note. Do we have authorization? Marcus asked. I'm the commander, Sarah said. I'm authorizing it. He looked at her steadily. Which ship? She looked at the Veranian cruiser in the porthole. Not one of the perimeter ships. That looks too aggressive. We need something further away, she thought. The Council's own secure communications relay station. The one in high orbit on the far side of the planet. Marcus followed her reasoning. Taking it down, even briefly, would tell them we know it's there. And that we can reach it. And that we're choosing not to destroy it. Yes. She paused. The message isn't, we can hurt you. The message is, we already could have and we didn't. Which is the truest possible statement of our intentions. 22 minutes later, in the middle of the Council's second-day deliberations, every communication relay in the Veranian Council's orbital network went briefly, quietly, completely offline for exactly 30 seconds. Every display in the assembly hall went dark. Every sensor feed cut out. Then everything came back. Perfectly. As though nothing had happened. In the chamber, the silence was absolute. Then Vecrith said in a voice that was very quiet, They are telling us something. Thesanvor looked at the now restored displays, at the feed showing the KERO in orbit, exactly where it had been, having not moved, having fired no weapon. His skin rippled with a pattern that translated precisely as, I understand. Yes, he said. They are. He looked around the chamber at 47 species worth of representatives. At the faction that had been arguing for preemption, 5 council members who were now very still, doing the exact math that Sarah had intended them to do. I believe, Thesanvor said carefully, that this matter requires a different kind of deliberation. Perhaps a recognition that the terms of our discussion have changed. He paused. And perhaps a recognition that the species before us, KERO, has demonstrated not merely capability but also restraint. Which is, I would argue, the more important quality. The chamber was quiet. Let us talk, he said, about what a genuine partnership looks like. The vote on Earth's full council membership took place on the morning of the 3rd day. It was not unanimous. 7 council members voted against, citing security concerns, technological disparity, and what the Lycian bloc called the inadvisability of rewarding unilateral action. These were not, by the assessment of anyone paying close attention, arguments being made in good faith. They were the arguments of species who were afraid of what Earth's admission meant for their own position in the hierarchy. But 39 voted in favor, including in what the Council's historians would later describe as a turning point in galactic politics, High Councillor Thessan Vor himself. The motion passed. When Okafor received confirmation of the vote in his quarters, he sat quietly for a moment with the result on his screen. Then he did something he hadn't done in 8 years of this work. He let his composure go, just for a moment, just alone in the room, and pressed his hands over his face and breathed. 8 years. 12 years since Eleanor Voss said those words in the briefing room. 20 years since first contact. The accumulated weight of all of it, pressing down and then suddenly, not lifting exactly but redistributed. Carried differently. By more people. By a different reality. He composed himself. He encrypted a transmission to Sarah aboard the KERO. 3 words. It's done. Come. The KERO entering Veranian standard orbit, not the holding position she'd maintained for 3 days, but actual designated orbital infrastructure, the kind assigned to Council member vessels, was a small thing technically. A change in coordinates. A different designation in the traffic control system. But every crew member on the bridge when it happened felt it. Marcus noticed Rosa appearing in the doorway of the bridge from the engineering section, something she almost never did, and standing there with her arms crossed, watching the displays shift. David Kim was very still at his sensor station. Dr. Una Park, the KERO's chief medical officer, happened to be on the bridge delivering a health report when the confirmation came through, and she stopped speaking mid-sentence. Sarah looked at them all. At this crew that had been her responsibility, her people, her family in the particular way that people become family when they share an impossible thing. "This is what we came for," she said. Her voice was steady. "And we're just getting started." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. But not everyone in the galaxy was celebrating. In the outer reaches of the Draith home system, on a military installation that didn't appear in the Council's official infrastructure records, a different conversation was happening. Commander Vekith 7, not Vekrith the Counselor but a younger, harder military Draith who shared only the prefix of his name, was looking at the same Council vote results that Okafor and Sarah were looking at. But he was drawing very different conclusions. Vekith 7 was the operational head of what the Draith military, in their internal classifications, called the Consolidation Directorate. Its existence was not known to the broader Council. Its mission was not friendly. For the past 40 years, it had been operating on the fundamental premise that the Galactic Council's approach to managing emerging threats, patient diplomacy, graduated sanctions, formal processes, was dangerously naive. And humanity had just, in Vekith 7's assessment, proven that premise catastrophically correct. They had built a dark matter warship in 12 years in secret under active surveillance, and the Council's response had been to hand them a membership card and welcome them to the table. Vekith 7 looked at his strategic analyst, a sharp-minded young officer named Kress, and said, "Pull everything we have on the KERO. Drive specifications, weapons signatures, performance data from their Veran Prime arrival. Everything." Kress had the data on his screen in 90 seconds. He scanned it. Then he looked up and his expression was careful. "Commander," he said, "if these specifications are accurate, they're accurate. Then a single KERO-class vessel outperforms our entire 7th Fleet in a direct engagement scenario." Pause. "Significantly. I know. Our weapons cannot penetrate their drive field. Our shields cannot block their resonance cannons. We cannot detect them on approach." Kress paused again. "Commander, there's no favorable combat scenario here." "I know," Vekith 7 said again. His voice was flat and hard and certain in the way that voices get when someone has already made a decision that they're now justifying. "Which is why we don't engage them directly." He looked at the strategic display. "We engage them where they're vulnerable." Kress waited. "They have dark matter technology. But they've had it for 12 years, maybe slightly more. They haven't had time to scale it." He paused. "The KERO is their best ship. Their most capable. Which means they don't have many of her. Maybe a handful. Maybe less." He looked at Kress. "A species with a handful of extraordinary ships but a conventional supporting fleet has an extraordinary weakness, the supporting fleet." Kress was quiet for a moment. "You're talking about Earth itself." "I'm talking about everything around Earth. The orbital infrastructure. The colony stations. The civilian shipping lanes. You don't need to fight the KERO if you can make Earth bleed everywhere else." You let that sit. And if Earth responds by sending the KERO to protect those assets, spread thin, then you've turned their greatest strength into a logistics problem. The room was quiet. Kress looked at his commander. Sir, this is a plan for war with a new council member. If the council finds out. The council, Vekith 7 said quietly, doesn't find out. Neither Sarah nor Okafor knew that conversation had taken place. But Vekith did. The old counselor had spent 200 years in intelligence and politics, and he had learned to maintain certain connections that were officially informal and unofficially essential. One of those connections, a source deep within the Draith military establishment, whose identity he had protected for 30 years, sent him a brief, encrypted signal on the night of the council vote. The signal contained no text. Just a code that, between Vekith and his source, meant, something is moving that you need to know about. Vekith sat with that signal for a long time. He thought about his conversation with Okafor. About the KERO sitting in orbit. About the vote that had just passed. About the faction that had voted against. Then he picked up his communicator and placed a call to a channel that he had never used before. A direct line that had been established quietly during the 3 days of deliberation for communication between the Council's oldest member and Earth's new senior representative. Sarah Weston picked up on the second signal. Commander, Vekith said. I need to tell you something. And I need you to listen carefully. I'm listening, Sarah said. HFY, Vekith said, using the human phrase that he had apparently somehow learned. His pronunciation was careful and not quite right, but the effort of it was striking. From this moment forward, the danger to Earth is not the Council. The danger is what operates in the Council's shadow. Sarah was very still. Tell me everything. The intelligence Vekith provided was incomplete. Fragments of a picture, gathered over years from a single source operating under enormous personal risk. But Sarah and Marcus were trained to work with fragments, and what they assembled from Vekith's information was enough to make the shape of the threat clear. The Consolidation Directorate was real. It had been active for 40 years. It had assets, ships, personnel, resources, outside official Draith military channels, which meant outside council visibility. And its new operational focus, in the wake of the KERO's demonstration and Earth's council admission, was humanity. Not a frontal military assault. That conversation with Kress had been explicit. They knew they couldn't win a direct engagement with the KERO. The strategy was attrition, harassment, disruption, casualties, the slow bleeding of a species that had extraordinary weapons but, compared to the Directorate's 40 years of galactic operational experience, relatively few of them. Sarah laid it all out for the crew in a secure briefing at 0800 hours the morning after Vekith's call, all 22 of them in the main briefing room, with the displays showing the fragmentary intelligence picture that she and Marcus had assembled through the night. Here's what we know, she said, standing at the head of the table. Her voice was the same as always, steady, direct, no drama that the situation didn't call for. There is a covert Draith military organization operating outside Council knowledge. They have been preparing an asymmetric campaign against Earth. Targets are likely Earth's supporting infrastructure, colonies, shipping lanes, orbital stations. Timing is unknown but assessed as near-term. The room was quiet. Here's what we don't know, the size of their assets in human space. The specific targets. Their operational timeline. She paused. And here's what we're going to do about it, we're going home. Right now. And we're going to map everything. Marcus spoke up. What about informing the Council? We're informing Vekith. He's the one who told us. He'll handle the Council's side of things. She looked around the room. Our job is to protect Earth. Which means being in Earth space with our eyes open before anything moves. Rosa raised a hand, not really a question-asking gesture, more a here comes information gesture that she'd developed over years of briefings. Drive Array 3 is fully operational. We can make the transit in 4 hours. Good. Sarah looked around the room one more time. I want everyone at their best for this. Rest where you can. Eat something. Because when we get there we will be working. She paused. And if anyone in this room has doubts about what we're about to do, about whether it's right, about whether we're ready, I want to hear it now. Silence. Not the anxious silence of people who have doubts and are suppressing them. The different silence of people who have already asked themselves the question and arrived at their answer. Okay, Sarah said. Let's go home. The dark matter drive engaged at 1100 hours, Veran Prime local time. To the Varanian fleet sensors, the KERO simply ceased to exist. One moment present on every detection array, the next moment gone with no trace, no wake, no residual signature. High Counselor Thessanvor was watching the orbital display when it happened. He saw the KERO vanish from every screen simultaneously. He sat with that for a moment. Then he turned to his aide and said, "Update the Council. Humanity's warship has departed for home space." Pause. "And add a note to the session record." "What note, High Counselor?" He thought about it for a moment. About 12 years of secret development. About Eleanor Voss, whose name he had learned in the past 3 days and whose work he had been studying since. About KERO, the word that Sarah Weston had used in a transmission that the Council Signals team had intercepted and translated and brought to him with a query about its meaning. About what it meant to underestimate something because you assumed you understood its limits. Note that the Council's official position on the limits of human technological capability has been comprehensively revised, he said. And that this revision should be treated as a standing reminder about the assumptions we make about species we have not taken the time to fully know. Earth's solar system, in the 3 days the KERO had been at Veran Prime, had been going through its own upheaval. News of the KERO's arrival above Veran Prime had not officially been public. But things that significant are very hard to contain, and within 18 hours of the KERO's departure from Veran Prime, fragments of what had happened were circulating in Earth's news networks. Unclear fragments, imprecise fragments, but fragments that carried the essential truth. Humanity had built something extraordinary, had taken it to the center of galactic politics, and had won. The reaction on Earth was complicated. There was pride. Enormous, raw, species-level pride of the kind that only comes from a moment when everything you've been told about your own limitations turns out to be wrong. There were crowds in cities. There was a particular quality to the public mood that Sarah, watching the news feeds that reached the KERO on its transit home, recognized as something like relief. The relief of a people who had been carrying a diminishment for a generation and were now, for the first time, setting it down. But there was also fear. Some of it rational. What happens now? What does galactic politics look like with a humanity that has this capability? Who else might respond the way the Directorate was apparently planning to respond? And some of it less rational but entirely human, the fear of success. The fear of what it means to step fully into your own power when you've spent 20 years being told you weren't ready. Dr. Una Park, in the KERO's small medical bay, had been monitoring crew psychological health throughout the mission, part of her official role, and something she took seriously as both a physician and someone who cared about the 22 people she lived and worked with in this metal shell. She found Sarah in the observation lounge at 2,200 hours during the transit home, sitting in the dark with the observation panels at full transparency, looking at the stars. "Can't sleep?" Una asked. "Could but didn't." Sarah looked at the stars. "Too much going on up here." She touched her temple. Una sat down across from her. She was quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that isn't absence but is the presence of someone who is genuinely attentive. "What's up there?" she asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor Voss," she said finally. "I keep thinking about Eleanor. About the fact that she built all of this, laid the theoretical foundation for every system on this ship, and didn't live to see it fly." She paused. "I want to do right by that. By her. By every person who put something into this that they didn't live to see come back." "Do you think you have?" Una asked. "I think today was a beginning." Sarah looked at the stars. "I think there's a long way to go." "There usually is," Una said. They sat together in the dark for a while, in the silence that happens between people who have been through something and don't need to name it. The KERO dropped out of dark matter drive at 0342 hours Earth Standard Time, inside Earth's solar system, at a point roughly parallel to the orbit of Saturn. They had been gone 9 days. Sarah stood at the observation deck as the familiar system resolved on the displays, the distant yellow dot of the sun, the gas giants, and they're small and blue and impossible to look at without feeling something. Earth. "Welcome home," Marcus said from his station. "Home," Sarah agreed quietly. The first order of business was the mapping Marcus had mentioned in the briefing. The KERO's passive sensor suite, enhanced by the dark matter resonance field that could penetrate hulls and shields, began a systematic sweep of every significant piece of Earth's orbital and near-space infrastructure. Colonies on the Moon, Mars, 2 of Jupiter's moons, and the asteroid belt. 15 major orbital stations. The civilian shipping lanes that connected them. The UEF's conventional military fleet, 47 vessels of varying class, none of them anywhere near the KERO's capability, all of them reassuringly present and accounted for. And something else. David Kim found it first because his eyes were fresh and he was looking at the sensor data with the particular alertness of someone who had been told there was a threat and was taking that seriously. It was subtle, a gravitational microsignature in the outer asteroid belt, consistent with a cloaked vessel using a technology that was far more primitive than the KERO's drive but was clearly attempting to conceal something. "Commander," he said carefully, "I have something in the asteroid belt. Grid reference Delta 7. Sarah was at his station in 3 seconds. She looked at the data. Then she looked at it again. "Rosa." Rosa's voice came through the comm, "Already on it. Pulling the signature now." Pause. "It's not human tech. The field harmonics are, I've never seen this profile before. But it's deliberate. Someone is trying to hide out there." "One vessel?" Sarah asked. "Can't tell yet. The cloaking interference is making it hard to resolve. Give me 5 minutes." 5 minutes. Sarah used them to think. The Directorate didn't waste time. They must have had assets already in or near Earth's system before the KERO even left for Veran Prime, prepositioned, waiting for direction. Which meant this wasn't a response to the KERO's demonstration at all. This had been planned before they even knew what was coming. That changed the threat assessment. It made it more serious. Prepositioned assets meant an organization that had been planning for multiple contingencies simultaneously, meaning this wasn't improvisation. It was a long-developed operational capability. "Rosa," she said, "when you have a count, I want everything. And I want weapons at standby, but passive. Nothing active." "Understood." 3 vessels, Rosa said 90 seconds later. "I think. 2 large, 1 medium. Configuration is consistent with Draith military design but older generation. Modified maybe, the cloaking is non-standard." Pause. "They're not moving. They might not know we're here." "They don't know we're here," Sarah said. "That's the whole point of how this ship works." She thought. "What's their sensor capability? Can they detect standard UEF traffic?" "Yes. Their arrays are pointed sunward. They're watching Earth and the inner system." Watching. Not yet acting. This was a reconnaissance phase, gathering information, confirming targets. Which meant they hadn't started the campaign yet. "Good," Sarah said. "Then we have time to do this right." She looked at Marcus. He was already anticipating the question. "We tell Okafor," he said. "And we tell Vekrith." "Yes." She paused. "And then we make a decision about these 3 ships." The decision she was referring to was the one that would keep her up for the next 12 hours. The easy answer, the militarily clean answer, was to remove the threat. 3 older model cloaked vessels against the KERO wasn't a fight, it was an arithmetic problem, and the arithmetic was very simple. But Sarah had not come this far, had not been part of the team that built this ship, to use it as an easy answer. The KERO was a demonstration of what humanity could do. And the most important thing it needed to demonstrate in this particular moment was the same thing Okafor had said in the assembly hall. They could choose restraint. Destroying 3 Draith vessels, even hostile ones, even ones that were clearly prepositioned for an attack on Earth, without warning, without the Council's knowledge, would change the story. It would turn a story about a species that had built something extraordinary and used it with wisdom into a story about a species that had built something terrifying and used it unilaterally. And that story would justify every fear that the 7 who had voted against Earth's membership had expressed. The hard answer, the slower, more complex, more uncertain answer, was to expose them. To make what the Directorate was doing visible to the Council. To force the rogue operation into the light, where it could be dealt with by the mechanisms of galactic law rather than the certainty of the KERO's weapons. The risk of the hard answer was that it gave the Directorate time. Time to act, time to move, time to warn their people. Time for something to go wrong. Sarah sat with both answers for a long time. Then she thought about Eleanor Voss. About the equations on the tablet that Mia had carried out of the hospital room. About the fact that Eleanor had built weapons but had never, in any document Sarah had read, expressed anything but the hope that they would never be used in anger. That they would be enough, just existing, just being known to exist, to make the world that required their use impossible. SYMJHY, Sarah thought. My responsibility. My choice. We expose them, she told Marcus at 0600 hours. No weapons. We go to Okafor, we go to Vekrith, we put the Directorate in front of the Council before they can act. She paused. We trust the process. Marcus looked at her steadily. And if the process moves too slowly and they hit something before we can stop them? It was a fair question. The fairest possible question. She met his eyes. Then we deal with it, she said. And we protect what needs protecting. But we try the right thing first. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. I'll prep the communications package, he said. The timing was the thing nobody could have perfectly calculated. Vekrith received the communications package at 1100 hours his local time. He was already in motion. His source inside the Draith military had sent a second signal, more urgent, indicating that the Directorate's operation had a specific timeline. He forwarded the KERO sensor data on the 3 vessels to the Council's emergency session immediately, simultaneously activating the formal process for declaring a rogue military operation in violation of Council law. The process took time. Galactic bureaucracy, even in an emergency, takes time. The Directorate moved at 1,347 hours. Not with the 3 vessels in the asteroid belt. Those stayed cloaked, passive, continuing their reconnaissance, unaware they'd been found. The attack came from a different direction entirely. A 4th vessel that none of them had detected, smaller, faster, that had been holding position in the outer system's heliopause, the very edge of the solar system's protective bubble, for what later analysis would suggest had been 6 weeks. Its target was Lunar Station 7, one of the 15 major orbital stations, home to 1,200 people and the site of Earth's primary dark matter research facility. The facility where Mia Voss worked. The attack was not a dark matter weapon. It was conventional, a high-yield kinetic impactor, the kind of weapon that is difficult to defend against because it is physically simple. A dense mass, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, aimed at a target. The kinetic impactor required no advanced technology to work. It was fast, it was cheap compared to advanced weapon systems, and it was absolutely lethal against anything that wasn't specifically designed to stop it. Lunar Station 7's conventional defense system detected it at 17 seconds to impact. Not enough time. The KERO detected it at 22 seconds. Sarah was at her command station when the alert came in. She looked at the trajectory on the display, the incoming mass, the target, the intersection point, and did the math in approximately 1.5 seconds. Weapons active, she said. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Rosa, I need dark matter resonance on the incoming object. Now. Already charging, Rosa said. She had been watching the same displays, had read the same situation. Resonance at 40%. Fire at 60, Sarah said. We don't need full power to stop it. We need precision. 60% in 4 seconds. 4 seconds. Sarah watched the display. 1,200 people on Lunar Station 7. Mia Voss, who had carried her mother's equations out of a hospital room and given them to the world. And an incoming kinetic impactor that was, by the physics of the situation, going to arrive in approximately 15 seconds. 4 seconds. Then the resonance cannon fired. There was no visible beam. No flash. No dramatic visual cue. The dark matter resonance pulse traveled at what could be described, loosely, as the speed of dark matter interaction, which was to say, effectively instantaneous at this range. It hit the incoming kinetic impactor and did what dark matter resonance did to normal matter at the right frequency. It came apart. Not in an explosion, in a silent, instantaneous disassembly, the dense mass reducing to a diffuse cloud of particles that dispersed harmlessly in the space between the outer planets and the moon. 12 seconds before impact. David Kim was looking at his display with an expression that Sarah couldn't fully read. Something between awe and relief and the particular quality that comes from being present at a moment you know you'll remember for the rest of your life. Target destroyed, he said quietly. Get me the 4th vessel's position, Sarah said immediately. It's still out there. The 4th vessel tried to run. It was the right instinct, or rather, the right instinct for a vessel that believed it might escape. The problem with that belief was that it was based on the assumption that the KERO needed to detect the vessel before pursuing it. The KERO's resonance sensors had already painted the 4th vessel's position the moment it fired, and the dark matter drive made the question of pursuit purely academic. It took the KERO 11 seconds to intercept. Sarah had made her decision about weapons before the pursuit began. She would disable, not destroy. The 4th vessel, and everyone on it, was evidence. Evidence of the Directorate's operation, of the pre-planned attack, of the covert program that the Council needed to see in full. Rosa fired a precision resonance pulse that targeted the 4th vessel's drive systems only. The ship went dark, not destroyed, just offline, drifting in the outer system with its crew alive and its data banks intact. Vessel disabled, Rosa said. Life signs confirmed on board. 14 crew. Good. Sarah looked at Marcus. Get me a secure line to Okafor. And prepare a boarding request to coordinate with Council forces. She paused. We do this by the book. By the book, he confirmed. At Lunar Station 7, the 1,200 residents had experienced 17 seconds of automated emergency alerts and then, with no apparent cause, the alerts had stopped. No impact. No damage. No explanation. In the research facility, Mia Voss had been at her workstation when the alarms went off. She had done exactly what the emergency protocol said, secured her workstation, moved to the shelter designation, and then sat in the shelter for 4 minutes before the all-clear came. She had no way of knowing from inside the shelter what had happened. She had no way of knowing that the thing that had nearly killed her had been stopped 12 seconds before it arrived, by a weapon her mother had theorized and she had helped build, fired by a woman she knew and trusted. She found out 20 minutes later, when Sarah's face appeared on her secure screen. "The station's safe," Sarah said. "We had a situation. It's resolved. But I need to tell you what happened because it's going to be public very soon and I wanted you to hear it from me first." Mia listened. Her face as she listened went through several things, and then settled into something very still and very clear. "The weapon worked," she said when Sarah finished. It wasn't a question. "It worked," Sarah confirmed. "Precisely. No collateral effect.